hidden far beneath the surface, away from the prying eyes of the world. There lies a secret network of communities linked together by one thing: their shared love of music. My name is Zan, some call me Rich Mom, and I'd like to welcome you to the pilot episode of my newest series. I'll be your guide today, so stay close and stick around. You never know what you might find in the underground. January 1978. Following a disastrous tour around America, the group that incited an earthquake of shock and obscenity across the UK and the world, the Sex Pistols, had broken up. The announcement sent tremors all throughout the music scene. While neither the first nor the only punk group, the highly influential Pistols' implosion had immediate effects on the then popular punk subculture. The scandalous death of Sid Vicious would soon follow after. And soon enough, it was a new decade. Styles were changing. Goth had risen from the ashes of punk, new wave was on the rise, and punk royalty, Vivienne Westwood, had gone from creating provocative bondage gear to pirate-inspired costumes. Punk was seemingly taking its final breaths, but miraculously, something new was brewing within the American music sphere, something 10 times as electric. By this time, a good number of new bands had begun to sprout up around Southern California, New York, DC, and other local areas in the States. They were starting to release a small catalog of music around the late 70s, but they had not yet reached their full potential. With punk seemingly on the verge of extinction, it seemed right for these new musicians to return to the pure essence of the genre and get more minimal and even more DIY than before. Because of this, the tempos became faster, the riffs more crushing, the lyrics more visceral, and the attitude more intense. So what was this evolution of punk? Many of you may know it by the name of hardcore. So, besides the more aggressive musical approach, what were the differences between 70s punk and hardcore? Well, for starters, where 70s punk groups like Sex Pistols, The Clash, and The Damned had been signed to major labels, this practice was much more rare within the world of hardcore. Bands were much more keen to starting their own independent labels to release their own music, like Alternative Tentacles, founded by Jello Biafra and East Bay Ray of Dead Kennedys, or SST, founded by Greg Ginn. This as well meant that many bands would have to fund their own tours directly themselves and do 100% of the promotion on their own. Another characteristic that separates the two is the fact that there are many different styles of hardcore that were birthed around the US, each with their own manner and styles of doing things. This as well makes it difficult to pinpoint which group, album, or which area came first. So, before we speak about the regional differences, let's speak briefly about the originators of hardcore. There is much debate over which album or which group came first, so I'll do my best to give you the most concrete answer possible. Many agree that one of, if not the earliest hardcore records is Out of Vogue by Orange County's Middle Class, released in January of 1979. But, as well, there was Nervous Breakdown by Black Flag, then fronted by Keith Morris, which released later that same month. As well, it would be a disservice to mention the originators without mentioning Bad Brains, whom have been making music since 1976, with their original band being a jazz fusion group named Mind Power. Now that we have a little background on a few of the founders, let's take a look at the primary regions that birthed hardcore. Home to many influential bands, Southern California had one of the largest hardcore scenes out of any region in the United States, being broken up into mainly 3 sections: Los Angeles County, Orange County, and Oxnard. Let's begin with LA. There were many influential bands that began their careers in the area of Los Angeles, such as Minutemen, Descendants, Circle Jerks, and the aforementioned Black Flag, now fronted by Henry Rollins, to name a few, all contributing to create the distinctly harsh and aggressive sound of Los Angeles that we know today, with Black Flag being regarded as one of the most important groups in the genre, essentially trailblazing a path for other hardcore groups to follow. One, in terms of touring, being one of the first hardcore groups to tour extensively and proving that touring as an independent act was possible. And 2 was the fact that their shocking image, perpetuated by the media, allowed hardcore to grow and expand even further beyond these bounds. Another key characteristic of the area is its distinct visual style, propelled by artists like Raymond Pettibon, Sean Carey, and Rick Clayton, whom were key in creating the in-your-face look that we now associate with hardcore. If we go a little further south, we find ourselves in Orange County, home to Adolescence, Agent Orange, Social Distortion, Shattered Faith, and the aforementioned Middle Class. Although admittedly a smaller scene in relations to LA, Orange County still managed to be equally as influential and as boundary pushing as their northern neighbor, creating a sound that is uniquely their own.
Inspired by the picturesque surroundings of beaches and boardwalks
that clash with the asphyxiating conservatism of the area. OC Punk mixed, at times, vicious guitar riffs with the vintage twang of surf rock, like Agent Orange when covering Miserlou or Mr. Moto, or Rick Agnew with his sound that has inspired thousands, whether playing with Adolescence or Christian Death. Go a little bit further and we reach our last stop in Southern California, with the seaside city of Oxnard, which developed their own style of the genre, Nardcore, by fusing the music with the deep skate culture of Southern California. Notable groups include Aggression, False Confession, Stalag 13, among many more, whom were mainly featured on the Nardcore compilation by Mystic Records. As mentioned before, hardcore was seeing its rise in popularity on the East Coast as well. In DC, bands like Minor Threat and Bad Brains were beginning to bud, the former adhering to their own ideology of straight edge, meaning no smoking, no drinking, essentially no participation in any self-destructive behavior whatsoever. Then there's the aforementioned Bad Brains, who were and still are unlike anything you've ever heard before, with their influences stemming from classic punk, but as well deep dub and reggae, mixed with the musical prowess to play tempos faster than the speed of light and then slow it down in the blink of an eye.
The ethos of DC was to play hard and play fast.
But most of all, it was to prove that a city seemingly so unpunk could stand on their own and compete with all of the big bands that came to town, such as The Damned, The Clash, or The Cramps. These bands that inspired hardcore acts to take up the music. And of course there's Dischord Records as well, the independent record label launched by Ian MacKaye and Jeff Nelson of Minor Threat. Initially created to release a record from their previous band, Teen Idols, Dischord Records have released many albums and singles from other influential DC acts such as Scream, Void, Government Issue, and The Faith, which, with the help of other indie labels as well, helped to propagate the growth of hardcore throughout the states and cemented DC as a legitimate contributor to the hardcore community. Take a trip up north and we find ourselves in New York, home to many punk legends, comprised of groups such as Murphy's Law, Agnostic Front, and once again, Bad Brains, whom were forced to move north after being barred from essentially every club and every venue in Washington, D.C., due to the sheer intensity of their live shows. Like the punks that came before, many of the performers got their start at CBGB in Max's Kansas City. Early groups of the scene such as Cro-Mags and Agnostic Front were inspired by Skinheads and Oi. And another specific trait of New York hardcore is their embrace of more metal-inspired sounds, following the release of Metallica's first album, Kill 'Em All, which once again led to an expansion of the genre, and soon enough, bands that mixed elements of hardcore, and specifically thrash metal, began to form, most notably Crumbsuckers, Nuclear Assault, and Ludachrist. Many of these groups are known as crossover. Now that we've seen the main regions and all of their differences, let's take a look at what unites all of these artists. Those being a much more intense sound than the original wave of punk that came before, a pure hatred for the Reagan administration of the time, violence experienced at the hands of police, and a very harsh anti-racist sentiment. And as well, it would be an absolute disservice to speak about hardcore without touching on the intense politics that made up a good chunk of the genre. As mentioned before, one of the few things that united punks from all corners of the world was, and still is, their disdain for the police. This was the Reagan era. Conservatism was at an all-time high, and programs such as Parents of Punkers, hosted by the very anti-punk Serena Dank, were the norm. Tensions between punks and pretty much everyone else were on the rise, and many punks felt the backlash. The stories of the clashes that the members of Black Flag had with the police may be some of the most famous examples. Greg Ginn has recounted many stories of being roughed up by police, as well as Raymond Pettibone, who had been clubbed in the head.
So we're out there for like 2 hours handing out flyers and just picking them up after people drop them or throw them at our heads and stuff. And I'm about to hand out more flyers, and all of a sudden, Chuck Dukowski, the bass player at the time, grabs my arm and throws me. I go flying through the air, flyers flying everywhere. This thing whizzes past my ear, like, ew. I go ass over tea kettle onto the ground, bumping into this small retaining wall that blocks the sidewalk from the parking lot. I get up thinking, like, what the fuck was that about, man? I was just gonna hand out a flyer. Why did he throw me around like that? And what was that thing that passed my ear? I get up, it's a guy, a cop on a horse, going by me, just following through with his billy club. Basically, he was the polo player, I was the punk rock polo ball. And it went by my ear. I think it was aimed for right at the back of my head. And I felt it go by my ear. That shit was going fast. If that hit me in my head, my fucking brains would have come through my nose, you know? So I immediately went from like, all cops are okay and you should just learn to get along in your community, to like, I fucking hate all pigs. Fucking stab them, cut them into pieces, and their fucking families, and fucking the next door neighbors, and the hometown they come from. Fuck it, just napalm everyone. You know, it doesn't take much to just hate them all, you know, because I'm sitting there thinking...
Besides the singular violence done by police against punks, there were many events of organized police violence targeted at whole venues and crowds of punks, such as the Elks Hall Lodge riot in 1979, or the events at the Hideaway on September 19, 1980. Scheduled to play this night were the Stains, Circle Jerks, Descendants, and Black Flag. But there were a few problems already brewing inside that would transform this event into a catastrophe. To begin with, the promoters had oversold the show. There wouldn't be enough space to house the nearly 1,500 punks whom were gathered outside the venue. Tensions began to skyrocket as many learned that they wouldn't be attending the show that they paid money to see. This, matched with the overly aggressive security hired for the show, only further incited the agitation that was growing outside the venue. Tensions rose to a boiling point, and the fans began to force their way into the venue, tearing down any door to make their way in, and then causing more destruction once inside. Evidently, police were called. Many were detained and physically assaulted. Or, as well, Black Flag's show at the Whiskey only a few weeks later, where their set with DOA was cut in half by police who decided to occupy the venue for seemingly no reason. About halfway through the show, a fleet of riot police arrived,
trapping fans who were just eagerly awaiting a show from their favorite artists.
Many sustained injuries from this night of violence. Several were clubbed in the head, and one woman sustained a broken leg. But once again, many more were detained for the simple offense of patiently waiting in line for a concert. And once more, these are just a few instances of law enforcement's zealous counter-efforts against the punk movement. This as well coincided with the media's continued efforts to paint punks as lawless, violent racists who want nothing but destruction. This contradicts with what many of the figureheads of the time spoke about in their music. The biggest and best example being Dead Kennedys and their constant critique of the American right and the then growing wave of racism in the US. Best examples being Nazi Punks Fuck Off and The Great Wall. More than 40 years later, the punk and hardcore scene of the 80s still leaves an impression when viewed and talked about. Why is that exactly? Well, for starters, it was one of the first instances of a subculture where anyone was welcome. This was an era of widespread racism and violent homophobia, and punk attracted and welcomed anybody whom was outside of the boundaries of what was considered normal. Its lack of rules or real care for societal expectations led to the creation of a space where truly anyone, regardless of race, sexuality, or identity, could be accepted as long as they had an appreciation for the music. And, as well, the movement was a launching pad for anyone interested in fighting back against Ronald Reagan's crusade towards people of color, poor people, AIDS patients, or any other disenfranchised group that he decided deserved his wrath. Many punks took part in demonstrations against and protested for nuclear disarmament.
And, as well,
punk's ability to shock and disgust gave them the upper hand when it came to conveying a message and to having your voice be heard. And as well, there was no shortage of songs made in opposition to his presidency. And the impact that was left on the music world is still felt today. Every time you go to a show and there's a mosh pit, it's all thanks to hardcore. And that's not to mention the wonders that hardcore has done for the independent music scene as well, allowing hundreds of bands to have a shot at releasing music in an era where you wouldn't have a chance unless you were signed to a big label, blazing a path for independent artists to follow decades after the movement and inspiring thousands to pursue a life that is completely their own. Thank you once again for watching. I wanted to try something out that was a little bit shorter than my regular videos, that I could release more frequently. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I always appreciate the feedback. And if you've made it this far, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more music-based videos. That's all I've got for you today. Peace. I'll see you in the next one.